Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to be talking about the elements of storytelling and kind of using the Cask of Amontillado as examples. And this way we can also analyze and discuss what occurred in the story that you guys read. I hope it's pretty sinister, so I'm not sure if any of you guys are into all that, but I hope you guys enjoyed it at least. So first and foremost, what makes up a story? There are those elements that we've already talked about. You as a junior, you should have heard this, for 3 years now of what the elements of a story are. And first, a story needs to have characters, right? And in this case, there were two main characters, Fortunato, the one whom got drunk, and the person whose story its point of view is from, whose his family name is Montresor. So we don't know what his real name is, but he comes from the family Montresor, and he's the one who ultimately feels insulted by Fortunato and ends up chaining him to the wall and closing up the wall so that he just rots for centuries down in that cellar. There's also a plot in the story, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment here, but it's the action that occurs within the story, right? Also, a story needs to have a conflict. It's what drives the action. It's what caused the character, especially the protagonist, to go on a journey in the first place. And also, there must be a setting. It needs to take place somewhere. In the Cask of Amontillado, it takes place in Italy. And I think it was important for that because in order for Montresor to do what he did, there had to be this love of wine and part of that culture that Fortunato stepped into. And Amontillado itself is an Italian type of vintage or wine. And so Poe chooses that setting to be a part of his story. Also, themes, and recall that themes are those underlying messages that the author tries to convey or communicate in the story. And so this story has plenty of different themes, like revenge being a big one. Um, Fortunato's love for alcohol and wine, and that leading to his demise is another theme. And remember, it's a very near and dear theme for Poe because he suffered with alcoholism and struggled with drinking too much as well. So I think there's a lot of elements of his life that we see in this story as well. Um, Also, the theme of evil, revenge are all part of it as well. And also the narrative voice, a lot of stories are in third person. You can have an omniscient narrator where they know all the thoughts of the characters, or you can have a limited where you are told the story only from one perspective. Cask of Amontillado is first person point of view, and it's all told from Montresor. And that is a style in and of itself that we'll talk about in just a moment. So these are all the things that make up a story, and in order to tell a story well, some of these things really need to be fleshed out. And so let's first talk about characters. You have your protagonist, who is the main character, and typically you think of them as good guys, but in every once in a while you'll have a protagonist that it's not really a good guy. And if you think of Montresor, he's the protagonist of the story. I mean, he's the narrator, but he's not a good guy. And you kind of you end the story thinking, I don't know if I should be rooting for this guy. He ultimately murdered Fortunato, but the protagonist is the main character, and he or she is the one who's driving the story forward. And you have an antagonist who goes against the protagonist, and in this case, it's Fortunato. And for some reason, I mean, we don't even know, and that's part of the thing about Montresor's characters. We don't even know what Fortunato did to cause Montresor to want to kill him. But Fortunato is the antagonist. He's the one who opposes Montresor. And foil characters, there weren't really any in this story, but foil characters could be people who have qualities or characteristics that are different from the protagonist, and that kind of gives you a different dynamic and helps you kind of understand the progression of the protagonist. Okay. Next, characterization, which is similar to characters, but it's how they develop or how they're presented throughout the story. And so you have different types of characterization, like static, where a character doesn't change at all in the story, or dynamic, they change along the way. And in this case, in this story, both characters change along the way. Although you might argue that Montresor, the narrator, kind of stays static with this desire for vengeance throughout the entire story. But you definitely see the change in Fortunato when he realizes what's happening, and he realizes his demise. You get to really see how he changes. Okay. And so we talked about this already. The protagonist is Montresor, and the antagonist is Fortunato. And oh man, you could just see even in this picture. I love this picture because you see the desperation in Fortunato, who's realizing he's being chained to this wall, and he's desperate. He's pleading for his life, and he's dressed like a jester, like an idiot. And you have Montresor just looking so evil, so sinister as he's building that wall and literally walling him in. The plot also is what drives the story, and it's the events or action that occurs and really it's propelled by the conflict. And so the conflict starts right away in this story, and that's whatever was the bitterness caused through Fortunato and Montresor's desire for revenge. Okay. Oh, and I like the seal and the family crest that was described in the story. It's this snake getting stepped on but biting back the heel, and that Latin phrase on the bottom is no one will um, no one will hurt us without vengeance, pretty much. And so, in the Montresor crest itself, and this is another way that Poe develops his style, they have this built in desire for vengeance that no one is going to hurt them without any kind of vengeance or payback. And so the plot structure, and typical stories follow this, where you have the exposition, and that kind of happened in the beginning of the story, but with the thousand injuries that Fortunato had borne, you have the inciting incident, which is, he sees Montresor sees Fortunato, and he's like, "Hey, come down to the cellar with me. I have a cask of Amontillado." And Montresor leads him down, and Fortunato, he can't his desire for that wine blinds him to what could be happening. I mean, if someone's inviting you down this deep dark cellar, there's always should be some question marks and red flags pinging. And so as they descend, literally they're descending down, but I think figuratively as well, they're descending down into this path of no return, especially for Fortunato. And the climax is when he's being chained and the wall is being built, and when Fortunato has that realization that he's gonna die, and then you hear the scream, and just the evil of Montresor as he's leaving and talking about how no one will ever find his body for the next 50 years, and how he's happy, and he finishes saying, "Hey, I'm about to die." He finishes the story saying, "I'm about to die, so I'm going to tell you now, and there's nothing you can do about it." All right, and the plot, as we just talked about, it'd be good for you to go back and kind of see the different things from the story and see how the plot is developed in this story. So next, we have the conflict. So what was the conflict? What was the thing that propelled the plot? Well, it's a struggle between two opposing forces, and typically we have two types of conflict: the external and internal. And I love this picture, this illustration, um, of when Montresor is about to put the last brick in, and you see Fortunato's eyes wild and realizing that he's gonna die. So crazy. And so here are the four types of external conflict. And in this case, I think the conflict is character versus character, where Fortunato and Montresor have some kind of antagonism towards each other. Other types of external conflicts are character versus nature, where they're maybe battling a disaster, natural disaster, or something, or the wilderness, or something. Character versus society is where the protagonist is fighting values, maybe, or maybe racism, or something that's prevalent in society that goes against their beliefs. And this other fourth one is not common, but supernatural forces or fate. Some might say that that's part of nature, but this is more of like when they're fighting some kind of um, untold being, or maybe even they're just fighting against some kind of generational curse that they've experienced throughout the years. Again, there's also internal conflict where a person is warring within themselves. And I think, there's a little bit of that in this story too, but not too much. But, when Montresor is, descending down into the cellar, I think there's opportunities for them to turn back, but he stays, unfortunately, he stays part of the course and ends up killing him. Okay. Now, themes. Themes, like I said earlier, is underlying message of literary text. So, the questions to ask is, what is the text about? And so, in your reading, think about what kind of themes there are in the Cask of Amontillado. Some might say that there's obviously the desire for revenge, and some might say the inability to forgive, or it could also be alcohol. Blinding people, and that certainly was true for Fortunato, as I mentioned before as well. Narrative voice is also key in this story because Poe, in stark contrast to what we read in The Mask of the Red Death, writes this in a very unique style. And it's the way that the story is told, and in this case, it's told in Montresor's point of view, and so you already have this perspective that he wants to kill Fortunato for some reason, and the story builds in its suspense as they keep going down and down into the cellar, and you're wondering, okay, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna stab him? And then once you realize, he's fettering him with chains to the wall, and then he builds the wall in front of him so that he's basically going to starve to death or lose oxygen. It builds that suspense and builds the story. And so, really, narrative voice is built through the point of view, the words that are used, and even the tense. What is it? Past tense, present tense, progressive tense, and that sort of thing. And so, even the words that were used in this story show you the narrative voice. And there's a lot of sinister words that were chosen. Okay, and also the point of view, like we talked about, and in this case, it's a subjective narration because you're seeing it from the first person, but he's telling his side of the story. I mean, we don't even know what caused him to want to kill Fortunato. So just keep that in mind because you got to ask yourself: is he a reliable narrator? And Poe loves to tinkle with this and to toy with the idea of the unreliable narrator, and because you're caught kind of rooting for him, but at the same time you're like, I shouldn't be. And so that's a style in and of itself when you read. So hopefully this video was helpful in understanding some of the main parts of the story. And as we continue reading, we'll read one more work from Edgar Allan Poe, and hope you get to really delve into his style and understand what he's trying to convey through his works.